The breaking point Sophie Reynolds adjusted the flame beneath a simmering pot of bouillabaisse, her focus absolute as she added a pinch of saffron to the fragrant broth. After 6 years at Lumiere, one of Philadelphia's most acclaimed restaurants, she had developed an instinct for when a dish needed that subtle something extra to transform it from excellent to extraordinary. "What are you doing?" Victor Harmon's voice cut through the kitchen like a serrated knife. Sophie tensed but didn't look up, adjusting the seasoning on the bouillabaisse. "I didn't authorize any changes to my recipe." Victor moved closer, his imposing figure casting a shadow over her workstation. At 52, the executive chef of Lumiere still commanded his kitchen with an iron fist. His reputation for brilliance matched only by his notorious temper. "It needed more depth," Sophie explained, keeping her voice even. "The saffron brings out the—" Victor snatched a spoon from the prep table, dipped it into the broth and tasted it with theatrical deliberation. The kitchen fell silent, other chefs and line cooks pretending to focus on their tasks while watching from the corners of their eyes. These moments of tension had become increasingly common over the past year. "Bland," he pronounced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Amateur. You've ruined a perfectly good stock with your experimentation." He dumped the entire pot into the sink, the beautiful golden broth disappearing down the drain along with the 4 hours Sophie had spent preparing it. Sophie felt heat rising in her cheeks, a familiar blend of humiliation and anger that had become her daily companion. She had graduated top of her class from culinary school, worked in 3 Michelin-starred restaurants in New York, and yet Victor treated her like an incompetent first-year student. "Start again," Victor ordered, already turning away, "and follow the recipe exactly this time." Something inside Sophie snapped. 6 years of suppressed ideas, of swallowed retorts, of creative instincts denied expression, all of it surged forward in a single moment of clarity. "No," she said quietly. Victor froze, then slowly turned back to face her. "What did you say?" The kitchen went completely still. No one had ever openly defied Victor Harmon. "I said no." Sophie's voice grew stronger. "The bouillabaisse was perfect. You didn't even properly taste it before you dumped it." Victor's face darkened, a dangerous flush creeping up his neck. "You dare to question my palate?" "I'm questioning your leadership," Sophie replied, surprising herself with her steadiness. "A good chef encourages innovation, not stifles it. You've rejected every suggestion I've made for the past 3 years without even considering their merit. Because your ideas are mediocre at best," Victor sneered. "If you want to play with food, do it in your own kitchen. At Lumiere, we maintain standards." "The same standards that have kept the menu unchanged for 5 years?" Sophie countered. "The same standards that have 3-star reviews mentioning dated concepts and lack of imagination?" Gasps rippled through the kitchen. Everyone knew about the recent lukewarm reviews, but no one had dared mention them to Victor's face. Victor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You ungrateful little—" "I'm not ungrateful," Sophie interrupted. "I've given this restaurant everything. 60-hour weeks, holidays, my best ideas. And in return I've been belittled, dismissed, and treated like I'm worthless." Victor's face contorted with rage. "You're fired," he spat. "Get out of my kitchen. Now." Sophie had imagined this moment many times, being fired for standing up to Victor, but the reality still felt like a physical blow. Still, something like relief washed over her. It was finally over. With deliberate calm, she untied her apron and placed it on the counter. "Your kitchen," she emphasized. "That's the problem. It's always been about you, never about the food or the people who help create it." Victor pointed toward the door. "Out!" Sophie looked around at her colleagues, some avoiding her eyes, others watching with barely concealed admiration. She had worked alongside these people for years, shared meals and late nights and the unique camaraderie that comes from surviving in the pressure cooker environment of a high-end restaurant. "Good luck," she said to them, then walked out with her head high, though her hands trembled at her sides. It wasn't until she reached the employee locker room that the magnitude of what had just happened hit her. Fired. No job, no income. No reference from the city's most influential chef. Her vision blurred with tears as she collected her personal items. A spare set of clothes, her treasured Japanese knives, a dog-eared notebook filled with recipe ideas Victor had never allowed her to implement. Outside, the November evening was crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn weather that normally lifted Sophie's spirits. But as she stood on the sidewalk, the beautiful brick facade of Lumiere looming behind her, she felt only a hollow uncertainty. What now? At 32, she had invested everything in her career, neglecting friendships, romantic relationships, even her health in pursuit of culinary excellence. And for what? To be discarded without a second thought after one moment of standing up for herself? Tears spilled down her cheeks as she walked aimlessly away from the restaurant, her mind racing through practical concerns. Rent due in 2 weeks, student loans, health insurance. But beneath the panic ran a deeper current of grief. Cooking wasn't just her job. It was her passion, her identity, her way of connecting with the world. After walking several blocks in a daze, Sophie noticed a small cafe on the corner, its windows glowing with warm light. The Morningstar Cafe, read the simple sign. She needed somewhere to sit and gather her thoughts before facing her empty apartment. Inside, the cafe was cozy and quiet, with just a few patrons scattered at tables. The aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods wrapped around Sophie like a comforting embrace. She ordered a chamomile tea and found a corner table partially hidden by a large potted plant, where she could cry without being observed. As she stared into her steaming cup, the tears flowed freely. 6 years of her life gone, her reputation in the industry potentially ruined, her confidence as a chef deeply shaken. "Excuse me," a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. "I couldn't help noticing you seem upset. Is everything okay?" Sophie looked up to find a man standing beside her table, holding his own cup of coffee. He appeared to be in his mid-30s with kind brown eyes and an expression of genuine concern. Normally, she would have politely dismissed a stranger's intrusion, but something about his unassuming presence made her hesitate. "I've just had a really terrible day," she admitted, wiping at her tears with a napkin. The man gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Would you like some company?" Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who doesn't know all the details yet. Perhaps it was the shock of being fired, or the unexpected kindness in his voice. But Sophie found herself nodding. "Actually, yes. I think I would." "I'm Lucas," he said, settling into the chair. "Sophie." She attempted a smile. "Sophie Reynolds." "Well, Sophie Reynolds," Lucas said, his voice warm and somehow reassuring. "Why don't you tell me what happened today that's brought you to tears in a cafe on a beautiful November evening?" And strangely, she did. "Unexpected encounter, so that's it," Sophie concluded, stirring her now cold tea. 6 years at Lumiere, gone in 5 minutes because I finally stood up to Victor." Lucas had listened attentively as she described the toxic environment, Victor's tyrannical leadership, and how her creative ideas had been consistently dismissed. "He sounds like the worst kind of chef," Lucas observed, "the kind who forgets that cooking is about passion and creativity, not ego." "Exactly," Sophie exclaimed. "Restaurants should be collaborative spaces. The best kitchens I've worked in had executive chefs who encouraged input from everyone." Lucas smiled, something knowing in his expression. "What would you do differently if you ran a kitchen?" Sophie hesitated only briefly before her ideas tumbled out. She described her vision for a kitchen built on respect, where every staff member felt valued. She talked about seasonal menus that evolved with local produce, about fusing traditional techniques with innovative concepts. "I've been developing recipes for years," she admitted, pulling out her worn notebook, dishes Victor would never consider. Lucas examined a few pages, his expression thoughtful. "These are exceptional, particularly this scallop dish with the preserved lemon and fennel pollen." Sophie blinked in surprise. "You know food." "I know a bit," Lucas said modestly. "Enough to recognize talent when I see it." He hesitated, then added, "Actually, I might have an opportunity for you. I've recently acquired a restaurant that needs a new direction. Would you be interested in interviewing for a position?" "Seriously?" Sophie felt hope flicker for the first time since walking out of Lumiere. "What restaurant?" Lucas smiled enigmatically. "Let's save that for the interview." "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., Sophie agreed, not realizing that fate had just dealt her an unexpected hand. The revelation Sophie arrived at the address Lucas had provided, then froze in confusion. She was standing in front of Lumiere. Assuming there had been a mistake, she double-checked the text message. No, this was definitely the right address. Perhaps Lucas's restaurant was nearby. "Sophie," Lucas called, emerging from Lumiere's front entrance. "Right on time." "I don't understand," she said, heart pounding. "Why are we meeting at Lumiere?" Lucas gestured for her to follow him inside. The restaurant was empty, chairs still upturned on tables from the previous night's service. "I should have been more forthcoming yesterday," he said once they were seated in the dining room. "I'm Lucas Morgan. I purchased Lumiere 3 days ago." Sophie felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. "You own Lumiere? You knew who I was yesterday?" "No," Lucas assured her quickly. "Our meeting was complete coincidence. I had just finished signing the final paperwork and was celebrating quietly when you walked in. I had no idea you worked here until you started telling me about Victor." "Who's no longer here?" Sophie guessed, pieces falling into place. Lucas nodded. "His contract wasn't renewed. Lumiere's reputation has been declining for years because of his refusal to evolve. After meeting you, hearing your passion and your ideas, I realized you might be exactly what this restaurant needs." Sophie's emotions warred between suspicion and hope. "What exactly are you offering me?" "Head chef position," Lucas replied without hesitation, "with creative freedom to reimagine the menu and rebuild the kitchen culture." It was everything Sophie had dreamed of, yet she hesitated. "I'd be returning to the same kitchen where I was humiliated." "Or," Lucas countered, "you'd be returning to transform a toxic environment into something beautiful." "Your call." Sophie looked around at the restaurant, its elegant bones still visible beneath years of stagnation. Could she really turn this place around? "I'll need 2 weeks to develop a new menu," she said finally, "and complete authority over kitchen staffing." Lucas smiled, extending his hand. "Welcome back to Lumiere, Chef Reynolds. New beginnings." The first week back at Lumiere was harder than Sophie had anticipated. Several staff members had quit upon learning of Victor's departure, while others remained skeptical of her leadership. Jason, Victor's former sous chef, was particularly resistant, undermining her authority with subtle comments and passive-aggressive compliance. "He trained under Victor for 8 years, Lucas explained when Sophie expressed her frustration. "Change is difficult." "I'm not sure he wants to change," Sophie replied, reviewing applications for the vacant positions. She had already hired a promising pastry chef named Olivia and a young line cook, Miguel, whose enthusiasm compensated for his inexperience. Despite the challenges, the new menu was taking shape, seasonal, sophisticated, but accessible. Sophie introduced daily staff meals where everyone ate together and could offer feedback on new dishes. Gradually, the atmosphere in the kitchen evolved from tense to cautiously optimistic. Then came the news that threatened to derail everything. Philadelphia's most influential food critic had made a reservation for the following weekend, their first significant review since Sophie took over. "We're not ready," Jason insisted during the emergency staff meeting. "We are," Sophie countered firmly, "because we're going to work together." That night, working alone in the kitchen after everyone had gone, Sophie refined her signature dish, a modern take on bouillabaisse that honored tradition while introducing unexpected elements. "Still here?" Lucas appeared in the doorway, tie loosened after a day of meetings. "Trying to perfect this," Sophie admitted, offering him a taste. Lucas closed his eyes as he savored the spoonful. "Extraordinary," he said softly. This alone would win over any critic. His confidence in her cooking made something warm unfurl in Sophie's chest. Over the past weeks, their professional relationship had developed a deeper current of mutual respect and attraction that neither had acknowledged. "Thank you for believing in me," Sophie said quietly. Lucas's gaze held hers. "From that first night in the cafe, I knew you were special." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility, until Sophie reluctantly turned back to her work. The review came first. Personal feelings would have to wait. "Full circle, unprecedented revival," Sophie read aloud from the newspaper, her voice trembling with emotion. "Under new ownership and the inspired leadership of Chef Sophie Reynolds, Lumiere has transformed from a fading establishment into Philadelphia's most exciting culinary destination." The entire staff had gathered in the dining room to hear the review, faces glowing with pride. Even Jason smiled grudgingly, having finally accepted Sophie's leadership after the critic praised his execution of the fish course. "This calls for champagne," Lucas announced, producing several bottles that had been chilling in anticipation. As flutes were distributed, he raised his glass. "To Chef Reynolds and the entire team, this is just the beginning." 3 months after that fateful day when Sophie had been fired, Lumiere was booked solid for weeks ahead. The kitchen operated with joyful efficiency. Staff turnover had dropped to 0, and Sophie's innovative menu had drawn attention from culinary magazines across the country. After the celebration, when only Sophie and Lucas remained, he took her hand across the table they'd shared. "I have a proposition," he said. "I've purchased a property across town. It needs the right vision to become something special." Sophie's pulse quickened. "Another restaurant?" "If you're interested," Lucas confirmed. But this time as a partner, not an employee. "Equal stake, equal say." Sophie studied him, this man who had appeared in her life when everything seemed lost, who had given her the opportunity to prove herself, who had somehow become essential to her happiness. "Business partners?" she asked carefully. Lucas's thumb traced circles on her palm, to start with. "Though I hope we might explore other possibilities as well." Sophie smiled, thinking of how differently things might have turned out if Victor hadn't fired her, if she hadn't wandered into that cafe, if Lucas hadn't offered her a seat at his table. "I think," she said, leaning closer, "that's the best proposition I've heard yet." As their lips met in a first tentative kiss, Sophie realized that sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best chapter of your story, if you have the courage to keep turning the page.